everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to lower the Magna. I'll just go through the products first, starting with the King Springs. So these are the rears, KCRL43, and the fronts KCFL42. So they're not sighted. They tell you that if they are sighted, they're marked, and what I mean by that is that there is a spring specifically for the driver's side and the left and the passenger side. So with the factory springs on the Magna, and I think the Verada as well, the driver's side spring was stiffer to accommodate the driver so that the car would sit level when the driver was in the car, if that makes sense. Anyway, but yeah, so the front springs are not sighted. What do we got next? We've got new strut mounts. These are just Mackay strut mounts for the front. We've got the factory fitted shock absorbers on the Magna, MR928279. So this was quite a surprise to actually be able to source these. There we are. Monroe rear shocks. And then we've just got some gold front shock absorbers. These are obviously sighted due to the mounting points. And they came with a bump stop and a dust boot. So that's the products. I'll just run you through the prices just so that you know potentially what the cost will be if you were to attempt this yourself. So we've got the front shocks 155, rear shocks 90, springs 350, strut mounts 70 for a total of 665, and that's all including postage. So 665 posted. Onto the tools. So we've got the trolley jack, bottle jack, which I'll be using to lift the rear suspension to meet the eyelet on the rear shock to put the bolt through. Socket sets, gloves, just an assortment of tools that I may need. My favourite, spring compressors, wheel brace, metal rubber mallets for any stubborn nuts and bolts, and I think that should be it. I took some photos this morning in a car park just so that I've got a before visual reference, and I'll take some tomorrow once I've completed the job to get that after visual reference, and I'll post those photos up just so you can see the change. I've also taken measurements of the current ride height, and I will complete the after column once I complete the job. So we've got front left, right, rear left, right, all practically the same there at 405 millimeters. King Springs suggests a 30 millimeter drop, so we'll see how we go there. In terms of how I measured from the eyebrow, which is the wheel arch here, to the center cap. And the Mitsubishi logo makes that easy because there is a clear center point in the logo. So I took the tape measure from here to the wheel arch, and that avoids any variances that you may have, such as uneven tire pressures in each corner. It's all the same at each corner if you use that measurement method. To access the rear shock absorbers, you need to remove the rear seat. So to do that, there are two clips for the seat base, one here, just pull it, and then over there. And then the backrest, there is two 12 millimeter nuts on the outboard, one there and on the other side, and then there is a 13 millimeter in the center. Once you've removed all those, you just push the seat base up. So from either side, just push it up, and that lifts it off these hooks here. So you can see there. So there's 4 of these hooks which will then allow you to remove the backrest. And then to access the shock, I just suggest unclipping these. You don't need to remove the parcel shelf completely, just pop these out, and then you can lift it up, and then there is the top of the shock mounted there. So there's 3 14mm nuts which you need to undo, and then that will mean that the shock can drop out once you've removed the bolt from the eyelet. So you've undone the 3 nuts underneath the parcel shelf, and then to drop the shock out, there is 1 bolt here, which is a 17mm. So you need to undo that, then remove it, and then you'll be able to remove the shock absorber. Out. So I've disassembled the old rear shock because there are a couple of few parts that I need to keep. We've got this plate here with a few rubber mounts underneath. Just for a comparison, we've got the standard height spring and the king spring. King spring is much shorter, much more than I expected actually. And then we've got the new shock here, so I'll just show you how I assemble everything. So we've got a rubber mount here with a metal cylinder, goes in like so. When you're disassembling the old shock or the old strut, just be mindful of not letting everything explode. So that's why I use spring compressors to take the tension out of the spring, so that when I undo the 17mm nut here, everything doesn't go flying. So it's just easy to keep tabs on how it all goes back together. And then on the top here, we've got another rubber mount, then the plate, and then the nut. One very important thing to note before you install the new strut is that the eyelet here needs to be facing east-west and in line with one of the threads, so that when it goes into the parcel shelf, these threads all line up and go straight in. If this is not in alignment with this eyelet here, potentially need to undo the top nut and then start over. So just make sure it's all in alignment so it goes into the car without any problems. Given that this is a lowered spring, I don't even need any spring compressors, so I just needed to push down just enough to get a hold on the top nut, and then I'll do that up tight, and this will go into the car. Okay, we've got the rear shock installed now. I've just got it hand tightened under the parcel shelf, and I just need to make a correction from earlier in the video where I said I needed the bottle jack to lift the suspension arm. It's actually to lower the suspension arm so that it will meet the eyelet here. So I suppose if you had two people, one person pushing down and then the second to get the shock in there, you could probably do it, but I've got a one-man team here, so I need to use a bottle jack. So I'll just position that bottle jack so you can see how I do it, and then we'll push this suspension arm down and we'll get this bolted in. You can see here how I've positioned the bottle jack. So I'll just come back. So we've got the brake, and there's an arm just beneath the jack, and I come out at this angle here, so I've got leverage, but I can also access the release valve on the bottle jack if it's not in the right place. Otherwise it's going to be tough to get it out, and then it just rests against the body here, but you're not putting a lot of kind of stress on the car body, so nothing will bend. It's just enough to get the suspension arm down, and then as soon as you get far enough, the shock just slides straight on. Okay, to drop the front shock out, there's 3 nuts here. They require a 15mm socket, and then coming down here, just move the brake line away. We've got a 17, so let's move those away. So I've got a bolt coming through, there's 2 of them. 2 bolts, 17, so just get a spanner on there, and a socket on there. So this may be where a metal or rubber mallet comes into play here, depending on how long your shocks have been in the car. So we'll give that a go. One tool I forgot to mention earlier on is jack stands, very important. So we're not getting under the car, but just for security and stability, I would not recommend just having the car jacked up with a trolley jack or something. I'd put jack stands under it. All right, so yeah, we'll drop this shock out. Hold it with your left hand, or your right if you're left-handed, while you undo these. There we go. Carefully lift it out not to hit the car. I will need to disassemble this one because I need this plate. So that's the strut mount, which is going to be replaced. The spring obviously is being replaced, as well as the shock absorber. You can see there the bump stop is completely trashed. These are only a few years old too, these shocks. So what I'm doing here is I've just fitted 2 spring compressors because I need to take the tension out of the spring before I remove the top nut there in the center. If I just undo the top nut as it is, basically it'll be a projectile. So the strut mount, this plate will just go flying. So that's quite dangerous, obviously. So I need to take the tension out of the spring by compressing it with the spring compressors, and then I'll undo that top nut, and that's a safe way to disassemble the strut. Okay, day 2, and we're only looking at a partially lowered Magna, so wasn't expecting this job to carry over to a second day, but here we are. The good news is I've got the lowered springs and new shock absorbers in the rear. Just show you the driver's side, so there we go. No spring compressors required to fit, so no marks or scratches on the shock absorber or the spring, so I'm quite happy about that. The problem that I encountered yesterday is attempting to loosen the top nut on the front strut. So I only had a socket set, penetrating fluid and metal mallet, and I just could not crack it, despite attempting it for probably a good hour over the day, just hoping that just constant effort would eventually loosen it, but no luck. So this morning I invested in a impact wrench. So I got this one from Super Cheap Auto. So it's a 4 amp battery and up to 400 Newton meters of torque, which you can actually adjust. So that's quite neat. I've never used one of these before. Well, I've used an air powered one, but not a battery powered one. So that should prove useful, if not only for this job, but future jobs that I may need to do on the car. So I haven't tried it yet, so we're going to see how we go, and hopefully it works. Otherwise I'm pretty much fucked. Success. Well worth 150 bucks. Look at that. We're in business. Well, to say I'm happy is an understatement. So that was well worth the investment. The impact wrench made light work. I mean, it took a little while, but just shows you how tight that top nut was on. And this is all I actually need from the old strut. So I just need this plate. Here's a comparison between the standard spring on the left and the lowered spring there. So it's quite a difference. Okay, so what we've got here is the new strut, the dust boot, the bump stop, all fitted. You'll see that there is a shape to the lower part of the strut so that the spring seats correctly. And then coming up to the top here, you'll see where the top nut goes on just below, there is a flat surface here where my thumb is, and that needs to marry up with the top plate. Probably I'll show you this way. Yeah, that's better. See on the right hand side, it's flat. So this needs to be pressed down enough to seat on there, and then the top nut can go on. Okay, the driver's side strut is assembled. A little bit more work and time than anticipated. So I had to use 3 spring compressors to get the spring compressed enough to fit the top plate here, and then the strut mount, and then get that bolt on. But yeah, the impact wrench made light work of those spring compressors, so there was no problems there. Just a little bit extra time to get it all assembled. So I'll now put this in the car. We are now lowered. What do you think? I'm quite pleased with the result. It's sitting really nice, particularly at the rear. I'll just bring it to the side-on view here. So it's a week since I actually finished installing the springs and the shocks, and since then I've had a wheel alignment done and obviously given it a wash, so I could bring it down here to show you what it looks like outside of the garage. You can see there the rear sits really nice. I'm really happy with that. You know, it's not up in the guards. I didn't want that because I still wanted an athletic, sporty appearance, and I think these springs have achieved that. So we started with practically 405 millimeters all around, the standard ride height, measured from the guard to the center cap. So from here to the center cap. King Spring suggested a drop of 30 millimeters, and what we achieved at the front is a drop of 25 millimeters, so it's now sitting at 380 millimeters at the front. And at the rear, we have a drop of 40 millimeters. As for the ride quality, it's a pleasant surprise. Now, I was expecting, just based on reading forums about King Springs over the years, that it was going to be a very harsh, uncomfortable ride, but it's anything but that. I actually really quite like the ride quality. The car feels nicely tied down. Just driving around suburban streets for the past week has not been uncomfortable at all. Now, having said that, over expansion joints, speed bumps, kind of smaller, harsher bumps, you're certainly going to feel it more. That's just to be expected with a lowered spring. But as I said, it's by no means uncomfortable. The car drives really well. It feels tied down. There's obviously less body roll as well. Looks far sportier now, so it needs to drive. We've got a little Magpie coming in there. So overall, no, it's not going to ride as soft as the standard springs, obviously, but it is by no means uncomfortable. It's by no means harsh. It's just firmer, more controlled, and yeah, I quite like it. To recap, removal of the rear seats. The seat base has two pull tabs either side, so just pull those towards the front of the car. The seat base will just lift up and out. There's nothing else holding it in. The seat back, there's 12 millimeter bolts on the outboard, 13 millimeters in the center. Once you remove those, jump in, and then just with both hands push the seat back up towards the ceiling to release it off the hooks. So there's these hooks along the top here, so you need to release the back off those hooks. Just one other thing is that through the pass-through, there's a piece of trim surrounding the pass-through on the inside of the boot, so it'll naturally pull away, but you might want to unclip that first and just make sure that you re-clip that in place once you put the seat back in. And then from there, just removing a couple of clips, you'll be able to access the top of the rear shocks. So you don't need to remove the speaker grills, the parcel shelf or anything like that. You'll be able to get access to the shock absorbers just by removing the seats. And obviously to remove the seat back, you do need to get the seat belts out of the way, but obviously that's pretty straightforward.